You're standing in a supermarket, mentally adding up every item in your cart, not because you're some financial genius who tracks every penny in a spreadsheet, but because you're honestly unsure whether your debit card will approve the transaction. So you put the premium cereal back on the shelf. You casually walk past the butcher section, pretending you weren't interested anyway. You convince yourself you never really wanted those blueberries. Then, years later, you find yourself in that exact same store and notice something strange. You've been tossing items into the cart without calculating the total. No mental math, no anxiety building as you approach the checkout lane. And the weirdest part is that nothing extraordinary happened that month. Something simply shifted beneath the surface. Here's what most people never learn about money. Life doesn't improve in a smooth, steady line. It improves in stages, sudden stages. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't understand where those stages are, you can increase your income every single year and still feel trapped in exactly the same place. There are three major financial transitions. Miss them, and a larger paycheck simply purchases a larger version of the same stress. And I spend an unreasonable amount of time studying money. More specifically, why some people earning $220,000 feel constantly trapped, while others earning $75,000 feel completely at ease. Today, we're breaking down the three exact points where life starts feeling fundamentally different. And I'll give you a warning right now. The third stage challenges one of the biggest beliefs most people carry their entire lives, that more money automatically means a better life. Most people never realize that belief even exists. Subscribe now so you're around when we get there. But before we start discussing numbers, let's make this personal, because numbers don't keep people awake at night. Circumstances do. Meet Jasmine. Jasmine isn't a real person, but you've probably met dozens of people just like her. Maybe you see one in the mirror every morning. A few years ago, Jasmine earned $48,000 annually. On paper, she looked perfectly fine. Stable job, reliable transportation, raising a child, functioning adult. But in reality, she was stuck on a treadmill that kept quietly increasing speed while she struggled to keep pace. Remember that treadmill. It's the main villain in this entire story, and it's going to appear 3 different times. Every time it's moving faster. Here's the roadmap for the next few minutes. Each financial level removes exactly one major fear. Level 1 removes the fear of sinking. Level 2 removes the fear hidden in everyday decisions. Level 3 removes the deepest fear of all, needing the next paycheck to survive. The income figures are simply markers. The real story is about the fear that disappears at each stage. So let's start with the first one, Level 1, the survival line. Picture a normal Wednesday in Jasmine's life while earning $48,000. She wakes up before her alarm because her mind is already calculating bills. She skips the coffee she actually enjoys and grabs the cheapest option available. During lunch, she checks her account balance before paying, carefully angling her phone so nobody around her can see the screen. Later that evening, her daughter mentions a $40 school event. Jasmine replies, "We'll think about it." They both know what that really means. It means no, because that $40 might be needed if the car suddenly needs repairs next week. She falls asleep running numbers in her head. That's not poor budgeting. That's living at the survival line. And millions of people spend their lives right there. Today, the median American household earnings roughly $86,000 annually. That's the highest it's ever been. Sounds like fantastic news until you realize that even at record income levels, most households still feel like they're barely staying afloat. Here's a statistic that should make anyone pause. According to Federal Reserve surveys, only about 64% of American adults could handle an unexpected $400 expense using cash. Meanwhile, around 12% reported they couldn't cover a $400 emergency through any method whatsoever. Not with savings, not with credit, not by borrowing, nothing. Think about what $400 actually represents. A vehicle repair, an urgent medical visit,
a broken appliance, the random surprise life throws at you on an ordinary Tuesday. And it becomes easier to understand when you look at another figure. The median savings balance in America sits around $9,000. Not wealthy families, not struggling families, the middle. $9,000 separating the average household from complete financial panic. At the same time, approximately 60% of Americans still report living paycheck to paycheck. This is happening during one of the wealthiest periods in human history. Sure, surveys show roughly 72% of people claim they're doing okay financially, but the phrase doing okay is carrying an incredible amount of weight there. Doing okay usually means nothing is currently falling apart, but you're also avoiding looking too closely at your bank account. It's a fascinating system. That's why Level 1 was never about becoming wealthy. It was never about luxury cars, expensive vacations, or financial freedom. Level 1 is simply about getting your head above water. For a single individual living in a moderate-cost area, that threshold generally falls somewhere between $55,000 and $65,000 annually. For a family of 4, it usually lands closer to $95,000 to $105,000, which, interestingly enough, sits very close to the national median household income. In other words, the typical American family is balancing right on the border between stability and struggle.
Surviving and breathing normally, and where you happen to live can dramatically change the difficulty level. The median household income in Arkansas sits around $62,000. In New Jersey, it's close to $119,000. Same nation, same streaming subscriptions, same overpriced airport sandwich that somehow costs $15, yet there's nearly a $57,000 difference in what it takes to stay above water. Now watch what happens when Jasmine finally clears that first threshold. She works her way up to $61,000 annually. Not lottery winner money, not millionaire money, just a few promotions and a slightly better opportunity. But suddenly, there's a small emergency fund sitting quietly in a bank account, existing for one simple purpose: absorbing life's surprises. The unexpected $400 expense stops feeling catastrophic and starts feeling irritating. She no longer calculates every gallon of gas before filling the tank. The school trip becomes an automatic yes. That's the reward waiting at Level 1. Not luxury vacations, not yachts, not financial independence, just the ability to breathe. And if that sounds like a disappointingly small prize, it kind of is. But for millions of households, it's the most important financial milestone they'll ever reach. The problem is, nobody warns Jasmine about what happens next, because the treadmill noticed the raise too, and it's already accelerating. Level 2. When every decision stops carrying a price tag. Remember the famous $75,000 number? The one people repeated for years as proof that money stops increasing happiness after a certain point? Well, the story's a little more complicated than that. The figure came from a legitimate study published in 2010 by researchers Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton. Their findings suggested that daily emotional well-being increased with income until around $75,000 and then leveled off. The internet immediately turned that conclusion into headlines, quotes, and social media wisdom, and rarely bothered reading beyond the summary. Then, in 2021, researcher Matthew Killingsworth approached the question differently. Instead of asking people to remember how they felt, he measured their emotions in real time through surveys sent directly to their phones. His findings showed something very different. Happiness didn't appear to level off, it continued increasing alongside income. Now there were 2 respected studies pointing in opposite directions. Academic researchers love that kind of conflict. So in 2023, something unusual happened. The researchers collaborated. Instead of arguing forever, they compared findings and discovered that both studies were capturing part of the truth. For most people, happiness continues rising well beyond $75,000, no clear ceiling. The flattening effect mainly appeared among the least happy individuals, and even then, it tended to occur after incomes crossed roughly $100,000. And when you adjust that original $75,000 from 2010 for inflation, it becomes roughly $110,000 today. The number didn't disappear, it simply aged into six figures. Which is exactly where Jasmine is headed. After years of effort, she eventually reaches $122,000 annually. She has a legitimate career now, professional responsibilities, business meetings, the whole package. And she crosses the second threshold, the point where money stops demanding attention every single day. I call this the decision tax. At level 1, you're paying it constantly. Groceries or car repairs, medical appointments or savings, school activities or household bills. Every purchase becomes a negotiation. But once you reach level 2, that tax largely disappears. You schedule the dental appointment without debating it for a week first. Here's what a normal Tuesday looks like for Jasmine now. She buys the coffee she actually enjoys and doesn't record it anywhere. The dishwasher breaks and becomes a service call instead of a household emergency. The school permission slip gets signed almost immediately. Retirement contributions happen automatically, and she rarely thinks about the exact amount. She still works hard. The difference is she's no longer having an internal argument every time she spends money. Level 2 doesn't make you wealthy, it makes you unbothered. And being unbothered is one of the most underrated luxuries in modern life. This is usually the income level people imagine when they talk about feeling financially secure. In one survey, around 45% of Americans said they would need a six-figure income simply to feel comfortable. In another survey conducted by Empower, people reported that roughly $290,000 annually would make them truly happy, which mostly demonstrates a universal human tendency. Whatever finish line we're chasing usually sits about 2 or 3 times farther ahead than wherever we're currently standing. But level 2 comes with its own trap. And yes, the treadmill is back again, faster than before. The expenses waiting here are almost absurd. Childcare for a single child now averages more than $14,000 annually. 2 children can push costs toward $30,000 a year. That's practically another mortgage payment attached to a pair of sneakers. Family health insurance averages roughly $29,000 annually. Even when employers absorb most of the expense, many households still contribute close to $8,000 themselves. Housing is no easier. To comfortably purchase a median-priced home in 2026, many estimates suggest a household needs income somewhere around $115,000. And even then, nearly 45% of income may end up tied to housing costs, well above the traditional 30% guideline financial experts recommend. To make matters even worse, only about a dozen major housing markets remain where a median-income family can reasonably afford the median-priced home. Just a few years ago, that figure was closer to 40. In an incredibly short period, most of the map effectively disappeared for ordinary buyers. And here's the most frustrating part of all. Gross income is largely an illusion. Nobody actually spends their salary. They spend whatever remains after taxes, deductions, insurance premiums, and every other hand reaches into the paycheck. That $100,000 salary in a state without income tax, like Texas,
you're actually bringing home somewhere around $76,000 after federal taxes and payroll deductions. If you're living in a high-tax state like New York or California, shave off even more. So that shiny six-figure salary people dream about often arrives as something much closer to $76,000 in spendable income. And that's before housing, childcare, insurance, utilities, and every other expense begins taking its share. That's why someone earning $125,000 can still feel surprisingly squeezed instead of financially secure. It's not necessarily because they're irresponsible with money. It's because the cost of maintaining what used to be considered a normal middle-class lifestyle has quietly exploded, and nobody updated the expectations that came with it. Which brings us to the final level, the one very few people ever reach, the one that completely changed how I think about money once I understood it. And before you assume this part isn't relevant to you, stick with me, because it changes the way every future raise should be evaluated for the rest of your life. Level 3. when working becomes a choice. Let's start with income percentiles, because the numbers are honestly absurd. To enter the top 10% of American households by income in 2026, you need to earn roughly $260,000 annually. The top 5% begins around $345,000, and the top 1% doesn't even start until somewhere near $680,000. So when someone earning $320,000 says they don't feel rich, they're not necessarily lying, and they're definitely not delusional. They're simply standing on a rung of the ladder where they can suddenly see how much taller the ladder actually is. But here's the realization that took me far too long to understand. Level 3 has almost nothing to do with income. It's about assets. The difference between someone earning $260,000 a year and someone who is genuinely free isn't usually their paycheck. It's whether their assets continue generating income while they're sleeping. Once you stop measuring success by earnings and start measuring it by ownership, the numbers become dramatically steeper. Today, entering the top 10% by net worth requires roughly $2 million. Reaching the top 1% means crossing somewhere around $14 million. These aren't simply successful professional numbers anymore. This is an entirely different financial ecosystem with different rules and different physics. And every year, the admission price seems to creep higher. This is where the famous 4% rule enters the conversation. Back in 1994, financial planner William Benjamin analyzed decades of market history and concluded that if someone accumulated a sufficiently large investment portfolio, they could withdraw approximately 4% annually and have a strong chance of preserving their wealth over time. Later research, including the well-known Trinity study, largely supported the concept. Turn that rule around and you get what's often called the Rule of 25. To become financially independent, you generally need invested assets equal to roughly 25 times your annual spending. So if your lifestyle costs $90,000 per year, you'd need approximately $2.25 million invested. At that point, your portfolio effectively begins producing your paycheck. You don't. Quick disclaimer. Some researchers now argue that 3% may be a safer withdrawal rate, while later updates from Benjamin suggested flexibility depending on circumstances. The exact percentage isn't really the point. The point is that financial independence is ultimately built on assets, not salary. And this explains why wealth gaps expand so dramatically over time. The treadmill appears one final time, except now it's moving at full speed. The wealthiest 10% of households control more than 85% of all publicly traded stocks. During the last 5 years, the stock market gained roughly 105%, while the typical home appreciated around 28%. Think about what that means. If most of your money sat in cash, you participated in the 28% world. If your money was invested and compounding, you participated in the 105% world. Same economy, same 5 years, completely different outcomes. That's not some hidden conspiracy. It's simply what happens when your money works alongside you instead of sitting idle waiting for instructions. Now here's the part where I need to be completely honest with you, because this is the belief I promised would get shattered. Once you pass this level, additional money does surprisingly little to reduce stress. Think about it. Level 1 removed the fear of financial emergencies. Level 2 removed the constant burden of everyday decisions. Level 3 removed dependence on the next paycheck. After that, there isn't really a fourth financial fear waiting to be conquered. So what does extra money purchase? Time. A fascinating study published in 2017 found that people who spent money buying back their time experienced higher levels of happiness. Hiring someone to clean, paying for convenience, delegating tasks they disliked. The happiness didn't come from being rich, it came from reclaiming hours of their lives. Which is exactly where Jasmine eventually arrives. She's not relaxing on a yacht somewhere. She's sitting at her kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon at 2 p.m., working on something she chose to do. Not because bills are due, not because rent needs to be paid by Friday, simply because she wants to. That's the entire game. Being rich is a number. Being wealthy is owning your Wednesday afternoon. Now, I can already hear the objection.
Ryan, I know people making $220,000 who are constantly stressed, and I know people making $75,000 who seem perfectly happy. You're right, I know those people too, and this is exactly where the entire income level framework appears to fall apart. If I ignored that objection, you'd probably be sitting there thinking this whole idea is nonsense because you've personally met high earners who are overwhelmed and modest earners who seem completely content. The data actually supports your observation. Roughly 44% of people earning more than $100,000 annually still report living paycheck to paycheck.
There's even research showing that nearly 38% of people earning $600,000 a year still feel like they're falling behind financially. Think about that for a second. $600,000 annually. So what exactly is happening? Two words: lifestyle inflation. The treadmill has returned one final time, and this is its smartest version yet. Every time income increases, expenses somehow find a way to increase alongside it. The promotion becomes a luxury SUV. The bonus becomes a larger home filled with larger monthly bills. The upgrades that once felt extravagant slowly transform into expectations. Before long, you're earning 3 times more than you did a decade ago, but carrying the exact same financial anxiety. Which reveals something important. The real reward was never the income itself. It was the gap, the distance between what comes in and what goes out. A household earning $75,000 while keeping expenses under control can honestly feel more financially secure than a household earning $220,000 that's buried beneath payments, subscriptions, loans, and obligations. And location continues to change everything. An income of $160,000 might place you comfortably in the upper middle class in Alabama while barely feeling sufficient in San Francisco, where a single adult may need roughly $165,000 just to live comfortably. Same paycheck, entirely different reality. But here's the discovery that surprised me more than anything else. When researchers asked people what actually makes them feel financially satisfied, the most common answers aren't private jets, massive investment portfolios, or luxury lifestyles. They're much simpler. Paying bills on time, living without debt, having breathing room. Which means the real fear people are trying to eliminate at every level isn't "I don't have enough," it's "I'm not in control." Money can create control, but so can consistently spending less than you earn, and that option exists right now, regardless of your current salary. So let me give you permission to do something that most money influencers would absolutely hate. Stop chasing a number. Start chasing a fear. Figure out which of these 3 fears is currently controlling your life: the fear of sinking, the burden of endless financial decisions, or the fear of depending on the next paycheck. Then focus every ounce of energy on eliminating that specific fear, because the jump that transforms your life isn't moving from $85,000 to $95,000. It's the moment the running calculator inside your head finally switches off. And if you're watching this feeling behind, feeling like everyone else somehow received a financial roadmap you never got, there's something important you need to remember. The reason $100,000 doesn't feel the way it used to isn't because you're failing, it's because the world changed. Since 2020, prices have increased by roughly 25%, and every financial threshold moved right along with them. You're not moving slower, the treadmill sped up. Nobody bothered to mention it. So picture Jasmine one final time. Same brightly lit grocery store, same shopping cart with the wheel that refuses to roll straight. Only this time she's not doing calculations. She reaches for the cereal she actually likes, the coffee she prefers, the fruit she spent years convincing herself she didn't need. And she keeps moving. No mental arithmetic, no anxiety at the register, no dramatic celebration. Nothing remarkable happens at all. Something simply becomes quiet. And that quietness is the real prize. Not the luxury car, not the investment account, not the income milestone. The silence where fear used to live.
First, you stop struggling to stay afloat. Then you stop turning every purchase into a debate. And eventually, if you protect that gap between earning and spending long enough, you stop depending on every paycheck. Your money begins quietly returning your time, your mornings, your afternoons, your choices. That's the level actually worth pursuing, not the one attached to the largest number, the one where the only calculation left is deciding what you want to do with your Tuesday afternoon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.